Hi everyone, welcome back to Somerset House and our digital series, Upgrade Yourself Peer Exchange. I'm Scott, one of the creative producers at Somerset House, where I lead on the Creative Careers and Skills programme. Today's event is being streamed live on our Somerset House website, as well as on platforms YouTube Live, Facebook Live and Twitter. If you'd like to ask a question, and for a chance it could get read out during the next hour, please comment on one of the platforms using the hashtag Somerset House. Our Creative Careers programme supports emerging new talent and offers access routes into the creative industries, which we deliver as 3 strands. First strand is the Creative Careers Academy, offering full-time work placements, fairly paid at London living wage, within the creative sector and on-site at Somerset House. Second strand is the Creative Job Studio, mentoring and networking events in partnership with charity Creative Society. And the third strand is Upgrade Yourself, like we are here, skills enhancing workshops and talks both delivered digitally and eventually in real life. Today, cinematographer Bradford Young will be sharing his experiences, some practical tips and advice around his practice, the film industry, and working with teams across many of his projects. So for now, sit back, get comfortable, and I'm delighted to hand you over to Bradford. Bradford Young.
Yes. What's up?
Hello.
Hey, Scott.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, all good. My pleasure.
Yeah. How are you? Where in the world are you? What time is it where you are?
It's 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm in Baltimore, in the U.S.
We're extremely grateful that you're here with us in London town.
I've been up, no problem.
Fabulous. You have a brilliant presentation to share with us, and then I'll jump back in with some questions from the audience. So if you're happy to take it away, then please take it away.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah,
See you in a bit.
Cool.
Thank
See you
you.
in a bit.
See you.
Yeah. Hey everybody. I can't see you, but hopefully you can hear me and see me well. It's an honor and a pleasure to be sharing with you today. It's an extensive presentation that I've been working on for, I don't want to say many years, but over a 5-year stretch. I've made a decision that I need to start sort of archiving my process and start thinking about my practice as an artist beyond just the sort of blue collar, sort of hired hand perspective that we all have to deal with when we work in the film industry. I'm learning a lot now that it's really important for us to not only document our own process, but if we're fortunate enough and have the time to document the process of those that we collaborate with as well. So this presentation that I'm going to show you today is it's very basic. It's literally a set of images, photographs, things that really have inspired me and moved me over the last 15, 20 years of my journey trying to understand what it is I actually want to say through cinematography and filmmaking. Most of the images are not produced by filmmakers per se. Some of them are produced by great artists of the time. And not because this presentation is presented through Somerset House, but you'll see that quite a few of them are UK-based artists who part of the African diaspora, but based in the UK. So folks like LINEAGE and Chris Ophelia, you'll see some of their work in the piece. But yeah, so and I'm a big I'm a big proponent of transparency. I tend to only share this presentation in really secure, safe spaces because it's a place for me to share, but also be vulnerable. So feel free to ask questions and really let's work together to sort of crack open many things if we can. I'm also a firm believer that it's not just about talent. It's not just about gifts that we all are blessed with to have. We all have those. I think it's just about unlocking your talents and your gifts. And I think the only way we can truly unlock our talents and our gifts is if we in tune with our creator and also in tune with our ancestors and our lineage. And then it doesn't just mean your blood lineage or your bloodline. I'm also talking about your creative lineage. So who do you identify with? What community do you identify with? Who inspires you? What shoulders do you stand on? And so my presentation will I spend more time on that than actually the results of the work. Some of, not all the films basically that I'm presenting are all available online to watch or purchase. So I won't get into the specifics of how I made shots, or I will, but not won't be so technical. Unfortunately, some people might be a little disappointed. I'm not going to really go into the technical things so deep, but what I want to really explore is the more really the transparency of my process. Um, Not the transparency of my process, but really my process that I want to be transparent with you about, and also my own personal story and journey, and how that makes a daily contribution to the kind of frames I make, or the way I see, or the relationship I have with light and shadow. So if we can put up the first slide, be great. Oh, Scott, you're back. Amen. So this is a Maurice Berger, who's a art critic um, from New York Times, and this quote came from an article that he wrote about Ming Smith, who's one of the great photographers, I think, of our time. In the article he wrote about her, which is a very comprehensive sort of study and conversation about her work, and which is actually, like, to me, a treasure trove of sort of hidden gems of a particular experience. She was photographing many people that I admire in spaces and places that are very mysterious to me, as a Black person, Black body, in the sort of Western American context, cultural context. She's understands the consequences of light and shadow in our development, in our life, and she's a great um, observer and capturer of those moments. Um, and the quote that Maurice wrote about Ming, which I thought is not a anything has anything to do with me, but it was really a quote for me. The quote's longer, but it's really helped me try to understand what my practice is about and what I aspire to do, which is I aspired, as the quote says, to be a photographer who made or makes, in this context, makes ghosts visible. So I'll get into the ghost thing uh, as we move through. You can go to the next slide. Again, this word lineage, it has a lot of connotation, denotation. It has a lot. It has its own etymology. It's oftentimes it's a very apolitical word, but it's also extremely political word as well. And in this context, I'm going to mainly talk about the more obvious, but also something that might not be as obvious. The more obvious being my lineage, my family lineage, and how that contributes to the way I see and that story, and also my artistic lineage, those along the way who have um, spiritually adopted me, physically adopted me, and have made a contribution to the way I see as a filmmaker, as a cinematographer, and as specifically as an artist. You go to the next slide. This is a photograph on my mom's side of the family. I was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. My mom was born and raised there as well. This is a photograph of my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. My mom is that I don't know if you can put your little finger, if you have that little cursor on your Jen, on your mom, yeah, the little hand. My mom is the young lady to her left. So just go over to the polka dot. Yep, that's my mom. My mom passed away fairly young, but this is a photograph of her with her and her siblings. And of course, yes, it is a photograph of my family. I know everybody in the photograph and have had very intimate relationships with everybody in the photograph. Most of the people in the photograph are no longer with us, but um, um, this photograph spoke to me as a child because it's the one photograph that is present in everybody's house, um, who who who's either in the photograph or their progeny. And the one thing that I really want to talk about is not just the photograph itself, which is beautiful in its own right, but about the photographer who took the photograph, who is the great Nat Brown, senior, from Louisville, Kentucky, who was sort of our community vernacular photographer who photographed um, pretty much every family that I've known, that I grew up with. Every person I grew up with either had a Nat Brown photograph in their house. He and his son were prolific in the way they approached photography, their life, and they were there for really paramount moments in most of our lives. And this is one moment that um, they photographed in my life. And I just want to start off by just saying that, you know, the reason why, one of the other reasons why I put this in here is because this is an image that made me acutely aware of the role of the photographer, and that the photographer plays a role, and that the image maker plays the role. And so when we all are now have these extreme questions about representation and definitional authority, I think it's really important for us to have really intense conversations about it does matter who shoots you. It's not about just taking a photograph. It is what's the pedagogy of the person taking, what's the pedagogy that the person who takes the photograph of you or your family or your loved ones or your community, what's the pedagogy they stand on? What do they believe in? Do they respect the people in the frame, or do they just want to take the photograph and get it done? What's clear to me about this photograph is that Nat Brown took time to compose it. He had love for the people in the frame. He cared about for people in the frame. And that's the reason why the photograph speaks to me the way that it does, not only because it's my family, but because I see care. I see that the photographer actually cared for the people in front of the lens. You can go to the next photograph, next slide. This is a photograph from the great Roy de Carava, who, you know, I've been looking at his photographs for more than half my life, and connected to the photograph that you saw before. Again, it's about intention. What is the intentionality? Do you love the people that you're photographing, or do you not love the people you're photographing? Do you care about them? Are you interested in them? Do you care about them as characters, as human beings? If you do, it's clear to me that you can generate images as the one we see on the screen, which is just a very intimate moment of love that only a photographer can see, and take this moment and where two human bodies are intertwined and use it as an expression of love. That's the story behind the image. And I think, again, once again, it's like, what is the story you're telling? What's the perspective? How do you see light and shadow? How does light and shadow inspire you to tell the story, and specifically with this photograph as it deals with love? You can go next slide. Again, another photograph of Mahalia Jackson from the great Roy de Carava. Again, love. I think this is about getting out of the way. I use this as a sort of a more of a technical piece because one of the things that Roy de Carava was great about was staying out of the way and using the tools he had in order to capture the moment. So if it was a little blurry or a little out of focus, or the image actually had what we call drag on it, as you can see on her teeth in the photograph, that is the best part of the photograph, right? Because through these moments, through the use of long exposures, he's able to show, suggest how one might have been moving in real time. And that is where, for me, photographs start to become cinematic. You can go to the next photograph. This is a photograph by the late, great Teenie Harris, who was the equivalent of Nat Brown, but in Pittsburgh. He photographed mainly African-American community in Pittsburgh, which is called the Hill District. He was very present, sort of never took the same photograph twice. His archives are stored at the Carnegie, over 100,000 images that he took over his lifetime. Reason why I put this photograph in here again is to sort of kind of extend this whole conversation around how stills can be photographed cinematic. Again, there's another story that's happening outside the frame. There's actually a dead body to the far left over a cliff that you can't see, but he was able to tell a story by through restraint, through not showing us what's on the other side of the frame, but allowing our imagination to sort of take over the conversation. And that's what's so beautiful about cinema, is that through one pass or cuts, or whether we're breaking time through editing or we are extending time through camera movement, we are able to give people the opportunity to be involved in a story, a developing story, by showing and not showing things, by concealing things and revealing things, whether it be through camera moves or through light and shadow. And so this is in here just a very rudimentary, not even rudimentary, I should say, it's kind of pejorative, but a very sophisticated, a person that had a very sophisticated understanding of cinema and the imagination of the viewer. You can go to the next slide. Again, knowing where to be at the right place at the right time. Teenie Harris, photographing in the Hill District at the height of the Black Power movement, knowing and understanding the importance of the moment and being present, and being not only engaged in the moment, but also be a custodian of the moment, as Roy de Carava often did as well, which is to stay out of the way but be involved, which is a very fine balance, which filmmakers, cinematographers, in my opinion, we have a long way to go in the sense of how we engage with audience, character, mainly not audience per se, but character, with very little technology, so that we can give performers the ability to take us into these sort of sublime, real spaces, where we are immersed in the human experience. And so photographers for me are great people to study because they show us how to be artistic at the highest level, but also be very observant and cautious and sensitive of what's happening in front of them without being disruptive of the event happening in front of them, so they can capture the best human emotion, human moment. You go, next slide, please. This is about understanding the power of, to me, this photograph says so much to me. Again, all of this is just me extracting information from a photograph. Unfortunately, Teenie Harris is no longer with us, and he did not take lots of technical notes nor sort of spiritual creative notes on the images he made. So it's our job as image makers, or in this case, viewers, to sort of extract or extrapolate what we believe to be the story in the frame. And to me, this is about when we unpack all these moments and we critique our moment with very sharp analysis, we still have to come up with what is the most hope. What's the hope? What do we dream about when we, in the final analysis, what's the dream? You know, and it's easy to for people who are orators, for people who are politicians, it's easy for them to orate or speak about what they dream. But it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to sort of show us and provide us with the image of what it can be. And so this is again a reference of a photographer that has a dream about a multiracial, a multicultural, multi-ethnic society where children don't understand the complexities or the sort of mishaps of adults. They only see the joy, and that's the joy they connect to one another. And so for me, this is about our duty as image makers to also, at the end of the day, when we have all the other analysis about life, time, space, light and shadow, that we must provide a solution to our and to our issues, but also have a dream and have an imagination. And this is what this represents to me. Obviously, it's very technical as well, right? Super beautiful. There's a flash there. There's other things happening that are worth talking about. But for this instance, in this context, I just want to kind of talk about the hope, the dream. We go to the next. Image makers must have philosophies and opinions. We're not journalists, you know, we're not expected to, you should not be expected to, and anybody that asks you to remove yourself spiritually, emotionally from the moment that you're capturing is a fascist, and they should not be part of your process. You should not work for them. You should not be in conversation with them if they don't understand that it is impossible for the artist to remove themselves from the context in which they are shooting. We are directly connected and have a connection to the moments that we photograph because we see ourselves in the moment. If we don't see ourselves in the moment, then we're not going to either hit the button or pull the trigger or do whatever we do to start the capturing of an image. We do it because in our spirits and our souls, the thing that's happening in front of us speaks to our spirit and our souls and tells us that it's the right moment to capture the image. This is a painting by the great Kerry James Marshall, and this for me again speaks to, you know, what is it that we how do frames, how does color, how does resonance tell the story not only of the artist, but tells the story of the story. And I hope that makes sense. But Kerry Marshall's work, for me, this whole series is about Black innocence. It's about all of the deep, richness of who we are, which is captured in our skin tone, which is captured in our melanin, which is a reflection of our culture and our history and assumed culture and history. Can also be draped in a very antagonistic history, American flag, the Boy Scouts, all of these institutions that have, for many, many years, kept us out of our conversation with joy, with innocence. When you put the package together, it's a very American experience. And so those two things together, those two sort of polarities together, that's a very American thing. And I think what painters tell us again is that in all things, we must have precedence. We must have a perspective. We also, you know, a certain amount of love and understanding of the people and the things that we photograph, and that we have opinions and philosophies. You go to the next photograph, next image. I also want to talk about this journey, my journey to sort of understand how to better think about capturing the resonance of people of color through motion picture and sort of the frailty and the you can go back to the other one, image, just the one before. Thank you. How we've all yearning for the big discussion I have with a lot of young people or creative people, or I think the big discussion I hear happening amongst lots of young creatives is this conversation around representation and how are we able to show a greater resonance, a greater vibration in the capturing of skin tone. And I think we just have to, it doesn't have to be philosophical. It doesn't have to be a lot of talking. You can just look into the treasure trove again of artists who are already been doing that with a great deal of respect and photographic quality, because they also understand the power of light shadow. They also understand the power of color spectrum. And we can look within the spectrum of colors, and we can look at those artists and really understand how we can transpose that into cinema. And so this frame for me really speaks about this question around skin tone and how do we sort of get to that place where we feel like we're making a contribution in an art that has to an art and a craft that has been so relentlessly against our better interest and our best selves. So I think this is for me, it's just an example of that. Go next slide. This is another image by, not another, but an image by the great Ming Smith, who Maurice Berger wrote the quote about in the first slide. This is her photograph of the great Sun Ra. And this is, for me, it's about Sun Ra. We can all talk about Sun Ra all day. We love, I'm sure most of us kind of understand Sun Ra and appreciate the orchestra. But for me, this is just about, again, a love. Like, where's your love? What do you love? What is contentious for you? Even in your contention, can you find love? And so I think that's the give and take and the sort of back and forth we have, not only with our artistic process and our life as human beings on this planet, but also our relationship with light and shadow. And so when it oftentimes seems like the space in which we're photographing subjects is not giving us a lot, we have to figure out a way to find the magic in the moment and the purpose in the moment. And so what I love about this is that it's still about cinema. It's about me understanding that I believe that whatever that cape is a sunrise wearing, if it moved and she shot it at a certain shutter speed, she would get this sense of motion. And that's not just about happy accidents. I know in film we talk a lot about happy accidents, things that sort of happen that are more spirited, but I also want to talk about hard work, rigor, and attention. And I think if we ask Ming, she'd probably tell me that that this is just an act, sort of the residue of the sort of persistence of the moment, but this is also her intentions. She put in a lot of hard work and a lot of understanding in the moment to sort of render this image. You go next frame. Another Ming image from the Hill District in Pittsburgh. A lot of parallels. You'll see some of the work I've done in the Hill District as well, because it's such an interesting place for Black life, Black history in the Northeast. She also spent time there exploring life there, Black life there, and all of this dimensionality. And so I really just want to just continue to celebrate her ability to see us in different variants of light and shadow. I mean, that image is all about texture, the complexity of dwellings and texture and historical residue development. There's all types of things that are in that image, but we'll talk about them more as we get to the next slide. So you can go to the next slide. A beautiful photograph from the funeral of Alvin Ailey's mother. Just concealment, just again, it's oftentimes we don't forget that we need these kinds of frames and motion picture. So it's just really about how do still photographers inspire us, can influence our process. You go next slide. Ming Smith again, collage work, her multi, there's James Vanderzee and there's James Baldwin there, but also, if we think about Vanderzee, his work with superpositions, overlays, double exposures. This for me is about lineage, her paying homage to somebody that's really inspired her process. It would be James Vanderzee, who's the elder on the far right hand side. You go next image. We'll come back to him as well. This is still from Bush Mama by the incredible director, Mr. Haile Garima, who was one of my teachers, mentors, friends, brothers, my surrogate father. Um, if you haven't seen any of his films, it's Hile Garima, Grima. Many of his films are on at the BFI, and probably his sort of seminal work is Harvest 3,000 Years, which is there is a film print available at the BFI. Funny enough, he's one of the film artists of our time who has the United States has had a hard time respecting his work and giving him um, the treasure trove of money to make as many films as he wanted. But it's often funny how when I go to Europe, I find that because film is celebrated as an art, as a piece of culture, that oftentimes, as we know, filmmakers of color are able to flourish in these environments more than they were here. But in spite of all that, Haile's able to continue to make films. Next slide. This is another frame from his films, Ashes and Embers. Again, a work that really transformed my whole understanding, to sort of decolonize my whole understanding of what filmmaking was. I'm a kid. I don't know what generation of folks are on this call, but I'm sure a multi-generational. I'm the kid that grew up on Star Wars, Goonies, all of these films that sort of colonized not only my perspective about what light and shadow are, what light and shadow is, but also colonized my whole perspective about who I am as a person of color, as a Black man, as a Black person living in this world. Most of my perception of who I am and the people around me has been inspired by films. And what we know about films is that films haven't always arisen to the occasion as the most caring humanist art form. It's one that's oftentimes driven by commerce and puts commerce before the story. And so to go to film school and be introduced to films that were literally all about humanity, about etching the human dilemma in film in the most caring, loving way, really sort of rocked my foundation and showed me how much of a disservice film had been in my own growth as a human being, and how I have, when I go to work every day, I understand I'm intrinsically and directly at war with an art form that I love, but also don't like. So for many reasons. So we go to the next one. Next slide. Ashes and Embers again. We go next slide. Bush Mama. Next slide. This is Losing Ground. Passing Through, by the great Larry Clark, who also was part of the LA Rebellion movement at UCLA. Larry Clark, Charles Burnett, Haile Garima, Billy Woodbury, and many others who were at UCLA at the time, where they decided that filmmakers of color, third world filmmakers who were there, indigenous filmmakers who were there at the time, needed to think about using cinema as a tool for revolution and change. And so I want to show you the beginnings of what Spike would circle back to, which was Mo Better Blues, the beginnings of that study of jazz as a visual sort of intonation used by color and camera movement started with Larry Clark's Passing Through. Next slide. Passing Through. Next slide. Again, work from the great Chris O'Feely, one of you guys' national treasures, somebody that I hope you guys celebrate every day. He's given the world so much to reflect on, and given us moments of great joy and pride as he relentlessly tells the story of his cultural context, of his existence, his wrestling with tradition, his understanding of tradition, and how all those things play out in his work is really beautiful. And Chris is somebody that's inspired my work as I look at light, color, and shadow, texture, but also culture and how that is all connected. He's really inspired, and resistance too. I want to say resistance as well. I think in the questioning of tradition, or the enhancement of tradition, or our generational responsibility to make a contribution to our traditions. For me as a young person from Louisville, Kentucky, a country boy, to get so much out of an artist who's so cosmopolitan and has such a layered story is fascinating. And I think it's part of it is because he's such a clear, direct, focused artist who has much intentionality behind his work. You go to the next slide. More Chris O'Feely. You'll see in Mother of George, Chris's work really inspired our use of light, shadow, color, texture, textiles, You go to the next slide. A frame from Daughters of the Dust, photographed by the great Arthur Jaffa, who is also a student of Highland Agreements, went to Howard, and a very dear friend of mine. Again, a movie that really totally rocked my understanding. And I didn't even know there was a thing called Black cinema until I saw Daughters of the Dust. I knew about Spike Lee, I knew about John Singleton, but I didn't realize that Black cinema was a way of a question of what it is still exists, but it was a journey where many an art and a question about a question about form and content that was being unpacked and questioned, and people were working hard to try to understand what that is and what that means. And unfortunately, because we don't have, we're not engaged one-on-one, it's also times a question to ask groups like, what is Black cinema, or what is Chinese cinema, or what is Japanese cinema, what is Irish cinema, what is Welsh cinema? You know, these are questions that I think are worth answering. Cinema isn't good enough to me. I'm happy to have the debate, but I think this is where this for me is the beginnings of this is Black cinema, and I think it started with the works of, say, Oscar Micheaux, started with the works of Haile Gerima. These are things that I'm really concerned about, and I try to oftentimes unpack in my work. You can go to the next slide. Another frame from Daughters of the Dust. Go to the next slide. A frame from Spike Lee's Clockers, shot by the incredible Mr. Malik Saeed, who went to shoot many other films from Spike, and probably his most seminal work as a nod to this whole culmination of visual form, content, site specificity, context, and how that applies to cinematography. His work on Bell is probably bar none, nothing can touch it. But Clockers was the beginning of us seeing this young person who, again, studied under Mr. Haile Gerima at Howard University, as did Ernest Dickerson, as Arthur Jaffa, as I did, and brings a certain intentionality and pedagogy to the work as he creates images. You go to the next frame. Frame from Belly, photographed by Malik Saeed, directed by Hype Williams. Go next frame. Another frame from Belly. Next frame. A frame from Mo Better Blues, photographed by Mr. Ernest Dickerson. Again, another student of Haile Gerima at Howard University. So now you're talking about Ernest Dickerson, Arthur Jaffa, Malik Saeed, and I all attended Howard University under the tutelage of Mr. Haile Gerima. So I'm just trying to show you the lineage, the story of 4 or 5 cinematographers, unfortunately all men, who went through, most of them men, and for this presentation, all of them men, who went through this system of understanding image making and storytelling as a reflection of our experience, not only our familiar family experiences, which are all very unique, but also our sort of collective experience as being enslaved people brought from Africa to the New World to develop empire, and our struggle to gain our humanity through our experience and reclaim our humanity through our experience and never forget our humanity through our experience, renders itself in the images that we create. You go to the next slide, please. Mo Better Blues, again, if you think about the slide that had a losing ground earlier, you see that there's a connection again. Larry Clark using color movement as an expression of the freedom or the tonality of jazz in our lives, in our Black lives, in our lives as human beings. The free nature of that expressed through a visual mantra, through visual storytelling, that continuous question that AJ is always asking, how can we bring a more jazz-ic ethos to our way of working? And so I'm just showing you that these are all people in conversation with one another who are exploring these ideas, but using filmmaking as an expression of our sort of intellectualizing of these ideas. Go next slide, please. Somebody that's like totally out of left field, did not go to Howard, but I consider to be one of the great mentors who I never had a chance to meet, but has taught many of us, including the 4 other gentlemen who I've mentioned before, Malik Saeed, Ernest Dickerson, and Arthur Jaffa. The great Gordon Willis really speaks to us, because I think Gordon Willis was in conversation with the Roy De Caravas of the time, who were using minimal tools to express deep emotional quality through filmmaking, staying out of the way so that the performance could persist, but also giving something very painterly to look at. Next frame. This is from the film, Alan Pakula's film, Clute. If you haven't seen it. If you have not seen it, please do. Another frame from Clute. Jane Fonda there. Next frame. Another frame from Clute. Donald Sutherland. Next frame. A frame from Ordinary People. Again, John Bailey, just an incredible expression of simplicity, blocking, painterly frames that say, don't have that frame actually in this scene never moves. This frame stays as it is, and it just punches in on a few close-ups. But if you haven't seen Ordinary People, you should see it. It's a challenge. It's an incredible film to watch. But yeah, no, this is actually from Clute. I'm sorry, it's from Clute as well. I apologize, from Clute as well. Ordinary People. So this is more Gordon Willis. John Bailey's work in Ordinary People is still part of the lineage, part of the conversation, but this is actually Clute. Next frame, please. The great Lynette Item Bacaulay, who is a professor at Oxford. I believe she's still at Oxford, but one of the great painters of our time, who understands, again, the complexity of color, memory, light, shadow through her storytelling, and how that manifests itself in canvases. Again, she really inspires me to play with shadows, spirited shadows, as I say, things that are hidden behind the shadows that emerge themselves as they get closer to the light. And I think she understands those principles. I know she understands those principles in her paintings, which makes her paintings very cinematic to me. Next frame. More Lynette's work. Next frame. Collaboration. Go to the next frame. This is a photograph taken by James Van Der Zee, who I mentioned earlier, who Ming Smith did the great superposition with James Baldwin. This is shot by James Van Der Zee. It's a photograph of Marcus Garvey. I just want to say about collaboration, all collaborations happen because they need to happen, not because as young cinematographers, we often experience, you go to a meeting to meet about a film and you hear that there were like 10 people on the list. And that oftentimes bothers me because what it says is that the director is not being very clear about the specific nature of your work and why they're asking you to come to the conversation. So it's very unlikely, highly impossible that 10 cinematographers who come to talk about the work are going to have the same interpretation of the work. Unless the director is looking for 10 different interpretations of the work so that they can kind of understand where that fits in their story. Then for me, what it does is that it lacks focus in the curatorial process because collaboration is a very specific thing. And the reason why I use this frame is because you have Marcus Garvey, who was one of the foremost intellectuals, thinkers of our time around self-reliance, the UNIA Strong Back to Africa movement in the United States, where he was providing other options for our existence here in America. He was also had a great understanding of empire, but a very complicated, very interesting, beautiful person. But he also understood the power of image making. So he knew that in order for this moment to have residue and resound and have an echo in this time, that in order for that to be playing out his legacy in this time, this moment in this time, and when I say this moment, I mean the moment in this photograph, that there needed to be a great photographer there. So he asked James Van Der Zee, who was the great photographer of his time, to come photograph the parade. And so I just think collaboration, curatorial, like Marcus Garvey at that time could have had any photographer come photograph him in this parade, any Black photographer, any photographer period probably to come photograph this parade. But he chose James Van Der Zee because he realized that James had so much to say and was making a great contribution to us and how we're seen through images. So that collaboration piece is a big deal. Challenge your directors. When a director asks you to come meet about a film, instead of them asking you all the questions about what you do, ask them what they do, because it's oftentimes clear to me that we need to feel comfortable that our process is going to be supported and that all of our vulnerability is going to be supported in the process as well. And go next slide. Process and conduct. Go next slide. James Van Der Zee at work. Just trying to show you, getting behind the process. You see all the things that this is a making of a frame, right? Obviously, probably not much happening here. No photograph is probably taken, but somebody took a photograph of Van Der Zee working, which is great to see because it just sort of shows you how these things go down and how people conduct themselves when they're working. And this is what this whole thing for me, this whole slide is about, and this whole conversation with you guys is about. Go next slide. I'm just going to go through quickly. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but these are just my process and my conduct on how I propose to directors how the look of a film should be. These are all extracted from lookbooks that I've made from various films. Before I shoot them, I'll create a lookbook and hopefully some of these images show up in the film, not the actual images themselves, but the spirit of the lookbook shows up in the film. If not, that's also part of the learning process. You make a hypothesis, you either support the hypothesis through your process or you debunk the hypothesis. Either way, it's all good. But I think it's about just showing how much it is important for you to put in hard work, intentionality, and rigor into your process. You can just, we're gonna go through these pretty quickly. Go to the next slide. Next slide. It's about palette. Next slide. Next slide. Me just exploring textures and colors, things that I thought might be present based on the literature that I was given, the script I was given, colors and palettes that could be present in the film to sort of tell the story. Go to the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And here you see I'm using, you can go back to the slide before, please, with the young person. Here I'm making a point about the tone and the texture of somebody's skin. For me, I wanted these characters, them to feel like wood. I wanted them to have deep, rich mahogany, ebony, cypress colors in their skin. And so I was trying to make a point that when you create that sort of tonality in a frame, you oftentimes need primary colors to offset that tonality so it's not monochromatic. So you'll see in many of the frames that I present an idea, but also give a strip of color to the frame so that you can often see why color contrast is often important in the process. You go next frame. Next frame. Next frame. Next frame. And if you haven't seen that film, it's called Vara, V-A-R-A, and it is available. We shot that film in Sri Lanka. I did it 11 years ago. It's incredible. It was an incredible experience, and I'll show you at the end a minute that sort of that tonality actually showed up in the film, which I'm very happy about. This, I believe, is for Selma. Go next slide. Keep going. Next slide. You go back to that one. That's the previous one. That's a frame. That's a painting from the great Charles White. It's about angularity. This is just about where you put the lens. Focus on really rich skin tones, but also reminding wardrobe or costume department, wardrobe that we needed, or costumes, I should say, sorry, wardrobe, costumes that we need to also insert some primary colors in there to sort of offset what I was going to do with the coloring of the film, to make sure that we didn't feel like a monochromatic, sort of muddy, icky film, that it had some vibrancy. And keep going. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Literally me doing, now you see, after I made the lookbook, now I conduct tests. Through the tests, we're doing everything from seeing how certain colors of blood through makeup department resonates in skin tone based on our lookup table or our color science. You can go to the next frame, please. This is about supporting the sort of iconic nature of the figures who are in the film, making sure that we never lose sight that that's Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King. How do we use light to bring forth memories for the audience who may had a direct or indirect relationship with these figures of their time, so that while they're watching the movie, they actually feel like they're actually watching Martin Luther King or Coretta Scott King as opposed to actors playing them. Go to the next slide. This is me and the great Mark Freeberg, production designer, trying to understand wallpapers, colors, and textures, and how that applies to skin tone, wardrobe, costume, and lighting. What you're seeing behind us are chip charts, color charts from wall colors. Behind her, the green, to the far right, the blue and the white. That's about how do you age colors, when colors get aged, what they look like, and as well as wallpaper samples. When those samples go on the wall, how will that all play out in the film? Next frame. Martin Luther King, David Oyelowo from the UK. Just trying to understand how that texture would fall off in an anamorphic environment as well. Go next frame. Next frame. Again, the sort of supporting the iconography of a figure, and how do you photograph them so that, again, you give the audience that relationship they've had with these figures. Next frame. Next frame. Next frame. Next frame. Again, go back to that last slide. I think this is good worth saying too about, tonality, skin tone, etc. It's just about finding the sweet spot. Where do you expose so that everybody gets their fair share? Understanding that when you shoot films with this varying skin tone, that you need to be very conscious and aware of how do you photograph all of them in one space without somebody losing out because you're trying to fulfill a technical mission on one character. It needs to be much more egalitarian. You can move forward. Next slide. Next slide. I'm sorry if I'm going fast. I just want to try to get through this. Next slide. This is a lookbook for Arrival. Next slide. You know, Arrival is all about the day, this mundane day where aliens arrive. And so I wanted to sort of show to Denis, this is the work from a book called Speedway by Martina Eigenhovenau, incredible photographer. Just the alien nature of everyday recreation. You know, depending on the light, depending on how people are photographed, you can turn something just as mundane as people sort of ride their bikes in the snow into a whole world. Like, go back to the first frame, you kind of question, where is that? What planet is that on? What is that? Is that a human? Is that an alien? Is that an animal? You know, these are the questions that arrive because of the way shadow, camera placement, light are all playing out. Underneath this sort of mundane thing, you can have another story, which is what I thought Arrival should be about. Go next frame. Next frame. Todd Hiddo. Next frame. Photographer Todd Hiddo. Next frame. Martina. Next frame. Next frame. Yep. Next frame. Go a little slower. I'm sure folks are like, I'm not seeing it. Next frame. Next frame. Again, light and shadow. I think you see the, when you look at Arrival, I know a lot of people had a lot of did not always connect to how milky the film was, but this is all, again, I just want to express that all of this has an origin story. It's not me just sort of saving the film or trying to make the film happen in the grade. These are all things that happen before I even go shoot the film. I have a concept of what I want the film to look like, and I want the film to say through light and shadow. And this is the presentation of the idea before we even get on set. Next frame. Next frame. Don't remember which film this is. Oh, this is Most Violent Year. Next frame. Next frame. So you can see a consistency. You can kind of give yourselves 2 or 3 seconds and keep moving through the frames. I won't. Again, you can just see this process, how it plays out on every film. It's very redundant, but the redundancy of it for me gives me great comfort when I'm on set, because then I know that I'm moving. I have an origin story. There's a lineage. I'm moving from a place of knowing, not a place of unknown, and which gives me a lot of freedom to not know on the day, to say I don't know, I need to figure it out. But if I don't have any basis from which I create confusion, then I feel like the confusion is chaotic and unwarranted. And so I'm happy for things to be chaotic, and I'm happy to live in confusion if I understand that in my subconscious, I have a set of rules that I've established. And this is what the lookbook does for me. Again, I think if you go back and see, I know I'll show you frames at the end, but I think if you go back and see all these films, you'll see that. You keep going. So, things played out pretty. These ideas played out in the film. These are, again, needs more screen tests that you see. Next frame. And yeah, you can go through the, move through this pretty fast. It's all frames from the film. So I showed you the lookbooks, now I'm showing you the frames from the film. You can go through it. Actually, I'm gonna skip this. Go to the next frame. Next frame. Result. So this is sort of the result of the films. You know what? Go back to that. I am going to spend some time on the other one, because I think the results, again, you've seen the films. You can now you've seen the lookbooks. Go watch the films again, and you'll see whether it played out or not. I'd love to hear your feedback about that. Execution. I think this is really important, because I think this goes back to the artist and where we stand in the telling of the story. I always use this as an example. This is one image maker that has an image of Malcolm X taken from a certain perspective. And go to the next one. This is another artist trying to tell the same story Malcolm X through photographs. And I think a lot of what I see in these photographs is their ability to connect and their relationship to the subject and their sort of preconceived notions about the subject. And I don't have any judgment or sort of complete understanding of where either one of these photographers stood. But I think what's important for us is to have an analysis when we see these images without us knowing directly, because we might not be in conversation with the artist directly, is to have an analysis, an idea of what is drawn from this distance, this sort of proximity to subject. And I think that's really important as storytellers, filmmakers, cinematographers, is our direct relationship from the camera to the subject is part of the story. If we're shooting a film from across the room on long lenses, that's one story. If we're shooting in front of the performer on tight and wide lenses or long lenses, that's another story. What's the story you're trying to tell? It all counts. It all has a physical component, a technical component, a spiritual component, and then a storytelling component. It all has to play. They all have to be in harmony in some way. They're not always in harmony, but they have to find moments of harmony in order for us to have what we love about films, or the frequencies of highs and lows that make it a real human story. You can go to the next result. You can kind of pop through these a little bit. Mother of George, Chris O'Feely, all in there. Lynette, all in there. Mother of George, Vara, you saw in the lookbook. Play of Light and Shadow, I think you saw in the lookbook. Keep it moving. Yep. Most violent year. Arrival. As I look through these, I'm just thinking about, I'm just not the same artist I was when I'm. I have a different set of concerns. Hey, there you go. I have a different set of concerns now. I think this section here, before you go through them, I just want to say that as filmmakers, we are oftentimes asked to come participate in a business proposal. And filmmaking is a director-driven medium. And it is not a cinematography-driven medium. It needs cinematography to be cinema, but it's not a medium driven by a director. It's driven by a cinematographer. It's a medium driven by a collaboration that's ignited by a director. One of the things that I've had to do in my practice is I've had to create opportunity for myself to be the artist that I truly want to be holistically, not one that's tethered to a director or tethered to a collaboration or tethered to a studio or tethered to the filmmaking structural process. I've had to create opportunities and take on opportunities where I can work in isolation by myself, without collaboration, without directors, so that I can assure myself that I'm still the image maker that I want to be. And so I oftentimes do film and video installations that I've been fortunate enough to have them in, sort of public institutions, so that I can display them to the public that might not come see the films that I've made, like Arrival or Most Violent Year. These are very sort of obscure independent films that masses of the people don't get to see. They get to go see Solo or Star Wars, these films, but they don't get to see the films that really, really, where I put a lot of my DNA into. And so I've continued to try to nurture and nourish opportunity for me to make art on my own, art with people that are not filmmakers, people, health practitioners, people that I respect outside of the filmmaking context, who have something to say, and I want to bring a photographic element to their sort of scholarship. And what I'm showing you now, what I'm going to show you now, just frames some pieces that I've made on my own. The thing that I did for Nipsey Hussle for Somerset House is an extension of that. That's me meditating on a person who wasn't a filmmaker, who was very cinematic, who I really, really loved and enjoyed everything, most of what he had to say, include in his music, but also enjoy what he had to say and the way he was thinking outside the music. And so I use these opportunities to assert my own identity, my own independence outside of an industry that where it's oftentimes hard for us to find our own independence. And oftentimes our voice is not always present, which I don't always think cinematographers should be seen. I think sometimes we just need to be not seen, but felt. And I think that's more important. So whenever somebody's talking about the cinematography in the film versus the film itself, I think then the film has failed. I think we have to be more hidden, less in plain sight. But I think the hard work comes where part of our journey and part of the hard work is to produce images based on the writing, directed by the director, hopefully written by the director, producing images that, or creating images or making images that speak to the spiritual, creative nature of that whole process. And in order for us to do that, we have to be whole human beings. And I was finding it very hard to be a holistic, whole human being on a set where every time I talk about things I have to say, it's always in the context of making a film. My identity, the great Harry Edwards, the great sports sociologist, tells a story about Bill Russell, the great basketball player center, who says, "I'm not a basketball player. I'm a whole human being. I just happen to be one of the best basketball players. I'm not saying I'm the best, but I'm just saying that I also I'm a human being also who just happens to also shoot movies. And so films cannot determine my happiness, nor my sadness, nor my joy. They don't have that much power in my life. I also have had to create other avenues, other provinces of happiness and joy for myself. And I find a lot of that when I'm making my installations and just out in the street with my Bolex, shooting grass, trees, children, the faces of my children, shooting kids playing, shooting mothers and fathers walking with their babies down the street, shooting light posts, shooting things that just inspire me and trying to figure out what's the story I want to tell with that, knowing that even though you don't see a face or a human body moving through it, or you don't hear me talking about it, that my story is there. And so I'm just going to show you these last few frames. You can go to the next frame. This is all motion picture stuff. I don't have time to show you emotion, but these are all just frames taken from some of my experiments that I've done over the last. This is from Bynum Color, something I made over 7 years ago. You go next frame. Where I'm using textures and surfaces and subjects to tell a story about portals and imagination. Portals of imagination. You go next frame. Collaboration with Miss Leslie Hewitt, one of the great photographers, sculpture artists of our time. She and I did a series called Untitled Structures and Untitled Structures and Untitled. I can't remember the first name of our first installation, but this is from Untitled Structures. Next frame. This is from an installation I did called Recognize about Teenie Harris, the photographer from Pittsburgh. These are one of the frames I did. I actually went back to some of the places where he shot in the Hill District to study the particularities of light particulate in the air that are no longer present in Pittsburgh because the industrial sector has been removed. So I went back to study to see if those particulates are still there and drew up a bunch of conclusions and ideas around that. Next frame. More from the Hill District, very much mirroring some of the work I see in Ming Smith's work in the Hill District as well. Next frame. This is all shot in Super 16, Bolex, me by myself in Pittsburgh at the crack of dawn, shooting. Next frame. Next frame. Next frame. Next frame. Next frame. I think that's it, right? That's it. Sorry, it took forever. It took a whole hour, but I hope you got something from it.
Hi, Bradford.
Hey,
thank you so much. That was incredible.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I'm glad.
I think we could have just listened to you for like another 2 hours, I think. Just keep going. It was such a lovely sharing and being so insightful and open with your thoughts.
I appreciate it.
It was really good. Grab some water, feel free. And there's a few questions that came in.
I got water.
They're coming in through two different places, two different laptops. So the first question from YouTube is asking, what do you feel are the unique qualities that a cinematographer needs over someone in another role, such as a director or producer, and not just in a technical sense, but the qualities and life skills?
Wow.
That's a good question.
Yes, very good question. Vulnerability. I think you need to be vulnerable. I think you need to be an unguarded person in the process of making films. I think it's very counterintuitive and may seem kind of illogical that you would be the most vulnerable in front of people that you don't know. As many people on a film set that you don't know, a community of people that you don't have a previous relationship probably before working on the film. But I think that's part of the nature of the beast or the sort of role that we play, is that we are the ones on the set that can never be guarded. We have to have the most amount of trust from every department, and every department has to have a lot of trust for us, because if there's no images, there's no cinema, it's just radio, right? So I think we have to be very vulnerable in the sense that we have to be ready to share our emotions, but also take in and absorb other people's emotions. And I know that's part of why I think, frankly, you see a lot of young cinematographers, period. We always seem to be in some sort of existential crisis, because we because we become like Velcros for everybody else's therapy, pathology around whatever. But that's our role.
Yeah.
Our role is to like embody the words and turn them into what people have seen in their mind's eye. But our own experience can never be free from that process. We have to also insert our own. So vulnerability, I would say, is the one thing that we have to access that I think everybody does, but specifically us, we have to be very vulnerable, because we have to be the impasse of other people's experience. You know what I mean? Experiences, what they see.
And also working with huge celebrities, like the sort of idea of having an ego or that kind of presumption. You have to have that trust, because you're right up in their face, and they have to give you what you need. I guess that's kind of
they have to trust you. You know what I mean? They have to trust you.
Yeah.
And sometimes what's happening behind the camera, even with the director, isn't always the most trusting environment for performers, right? That's always what we know about the director-actor relationship, is about trust, right? It's about, and they're not always trusting one another, and that's the healthy, sometimes not always healthy, but sometimes a healthy tension that creates a film, creates a performance. But I think we have to be the ones in front of the actors, the performers, where they say, actually, I trust you, you know what I mean? And so that's a big, and in that sense, you become the therapist in a way, but that's part of our role.
To get the right shot.
That's right.
Someone again on YouTube has said, I watched your short film Untitled yesterday. What was your decision to have it in black and white over color? So that's obviously shooting of the
I remember I asked Haile Garima this when I watched Harvest 3,000 Years for the first time, and I said, why didn't you shoot it in color? And he said, because there was too much green in the grass and too much blue in the sky, and I didn't want that to be part of the conversation. I didn't want anybody to talk about the colors. I only wanted people to talk about the story. And I was like, wow, that's why cinematography is so powerful. You have to make the right decisions, and that doesn't always come from the cinematographer. The director also understands, a great director understands the power of cinematography. And so I shot it, I do most of my installations in black and white, because there's a lot of things in photographing color that are distracting and don't contribute to the story. So it's easier for me to create these stronger statements that I'm trying to create in my experimental films by creating a visual binary reality. So you're really only focused on, and that's why I use black objects, so that you also have more focus on the object, the texture, the materiality. So me, black and white is really just like a really safe space for me to make sure that the viewer is focused on the right things, not the green on the tree or the red on the shirt. If people start talking to me about, that red shirt is so beautiful, and they miss the whole point, So I use black and white as it just takes the distraction away. Yeah, it's a tool, but also I just love black and white, because it's the purity of light and shadow. It's the essence of what. Even when you shoot in color photography, you got to understand where your midtones and your shadows and your highlights are, and where you place those according to the story.
Cool. Thinking about the building the image and the story, do you create and keep all of your lookbooks and your vision boards for your creative projects? And how important is archiving these assets?
So such a good question. I'm in like the first phases of like, first of all, remembering how much I saved. I have I have all these places, and my wife and I are always dropping off boxes, and the house in the woods that we never go to, or this house that we're living in now that's got like a basement where we got boxes and stuff. It's hard for me to look at any of that as just trash now. It's all part of my process, and I got to start. So I've just started like in my own way. It's hard for me too, because it's very emotional, because I'm gonna have to reflect on, when I see the movie, I see the life of my children. So or my relationship with my partner, it's like, oh man, we were in a rough patch during that movie. I don't want to look at that. Or that's when we found out this thing about my son, and I don't want to look at that. But it's part of our healing too. It's part of the therapy. That's like,
Yeah.
That's what that's why everybody's saying now, go get therapy. It's like, it's true. You know, I got to go talk to the material. So I'm archiving because I also just feel like, if it goes no further than my children, I want them to understand that, like, I wasn't just like I wasn't just like a DP or a filmmaker or a cinematographer, you know what I mean? Like, I was also trying to say something. And the only way I can show them that is by giving them the material to reflect on, you know? And so for me, archiving is like, if you're just starting out now in your career or your your art practice, don't throw anything away. I mean, you know that. But save as much as you can, and really be intentional about organizing that. And if you need to ask somebody to help you with it, do it. It's really important. It's very important.
I guess the way you speak, sort of family and human relationships, is really important to you. Thinking in a sort of funny sense, when you have like a sort of family party or your friends around, are you the sort of designated camera person? So they hand you the camera because they expect this beautiful thing, or you're like, I'm having a day off. It's not my.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the worst thing. The worst is, let Bradford take it. He's not doing
it.
Images don't come. They don't come to me that way. You know what I mean? They don't come to me that way. It's like, my kids are probably the most photographed kids of our cohort in our community of friends who all live. But it takes me a while to get to that. Like, I have to see it. Oh, this is a great moment. Then I got to run and get the camera. It's a whole process. So it's not and I'm not that guy, that person that walks around with a camera just strapped across my body. It also feels very restrictive and entitled, and it's too much to carry around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thinking about sort of honest critical feedback, who do you go to for kind of someone that can pick apart your ideas or question you and sort of provocate your ideas?
Yeah.
Do you have people that you go to, like sort of peers and colleagues?
Yeah, there's a whole community of people that, like, you know, let's just take, for instance, not necessarily the, like, after the film's made, but that's always part of it too. But, you know, I have like a whole crew of people when I wanted to do solo and I wasn't quite sure it was something I should do as an artist, or like if I want to have that part of my legacy. I asked like 30, 40 people, you know, is this something I should do? And they all had different answers. And I would say the main person is probably Haile Garima. I would say Arthur Jaffa, probably one of the top. Elisa Blunt Moorhead, somebody I always speak to. My wife, in the top two. And less now because, you know, we have so many kids now. It's like hard for us to always have those.
The kids will be feeding in soon. They'll be telling you exactly what.
Oh, my oldest.
They'll be giving you lots of opinion, I'm sure.
He's getting there.
Finger on the pulse.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because our audience, some will be graduating from film school and university and stuff. So I guess those that have just graduated into this in this time without your tutors feeding back, or it's good to have that collaborative, those people around you that you trust, that you can get honest grilling from, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the lost art form of filmmaking, is the lack of analysis. Criticism, there's no lack of criticism. Everybody has a critique or a criticism, but an idea of analysis is we don't even understand the difference between criticism and analysis. So analysis is not there anymore. And we need to develop scholarship and teaching. And I think film schools need to, you know, people that go in it for the theoretical part of what we do, or the critical part of what we do. That's one thing, but I think there needs to be the fourth wing or the fifth wing or the seventh wing of filmmaking is analysis, which is not apolitical, but slightly apolitical. We need analysis. And I think part of criticism, feedback, and sharing and mentorship is part of the analysis part, you know. And,
is key.
It's key.
Yes. One last question, Bradford, just to out of time.
Yeah.
Just to finish up, how important is gut instinct and listening to your creative inner voice? So following the butterflies in your tummy, or falling into a project, or you have two options. Which one do you go for? Any top tips or any kind of things that you think?
Yeah, I always follow my gut. And sometimes your gut betrays you. But when you follow, it seems that your gut is betraying you. But when you follow your gut, you know it's always the right decision. That's, you know, films that I've done that my gut said don't do it, and I still did it. And it turned out, films my gut said don't do it, and I didn't do it, and it's the best decision I ever made. The list of those is massive. big mistakes if I had shot them. But you know, my gut told me not to. Shots, setups, analysis, and conversations, debate around the way a scene should be or whatever in real time while you're making the film. Like choosing those battles is your gut feeling. If your gut feeling tells you to go hard on this idea, even though the director is saying that that's not what they want to do, if you feel passionate about it and your gut tells you gotta really make the point, even if you don't end up shooting the shot, you have to follow that. But you also have to follow your gut if it says it's not worth the battle, you know. And so that's all you really have. I mean, I honestly, I connect the gut to the Most High, to the Creator. I connect my gut to my ancestors, and so for me, it's about never betraying that feeling because it's so sacred. You know what I mean? I don't take it lightly. I don't think it's just totally all in your feelings. I think when you have that bubble, we have those butterflies. There's something else more direct and more existential that's trying to tell you something, and you really got to listen. You know?
I think you said something about your creative visual value system, your sort of value systems, and all those things. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's all you have, really. That's what distinguishes you from others. You know what I mean? Is that I hope, you know, one of the last things I say to y'all, the young filmmakers who are listening, and is you know, don't let this filmmaking process that seems oftentimes so one way, so singular, tell you that you are disposable because there's somebody else that can do exactly what you can do. It's just not true. It's not true. Only you can tell your story. You know what I mean? Your vision is determined by the story that you have. The way you see light and shadow is determined by the story you have, and that your story is unlike anybody else's. So it's all about finding a safe space for you to tell your story. That's really what this filmmaking process is about. And, you know, honestly, you know, I just feel real guarded about saying this, like, you know, about how that makes a contribution to literally the amount of food we put in our mouth. But I think the idea of like the starving artist is a ridiculous notion. I don't really support that. But I do think that, I always say to young filmmakers, like, do you want to be hungry now or hungry later? And you know what I mean? Sometimes in order to secure your lack of starvation later, you have to be a little bit hungry now. And the hunger cannot drive you to make irrational decisions. To make decisions you don't want to make. The hunger should allow you to also access the most powerful word you have in your process, which is the word no. No. You know what I mean? No, I will not do that. You saying it to somebody else, or you saying it to yourself? More importantly, saying it to yourself that I will not do that film because that does not stand up to the things that I want to say in my body of work. And that may mean you're going to shoot less films, but that's what it is. You know, that may mean less money right now, or less whatever right now. You don't got the fancy sneakers, or you can't go to End and get you a nice shirt. You got all that. That's okay, because at the end of the day,
it will come.
It will come. It will come.
Yeah.
Take my journey as a embodiment of that. Like, don't look at where I am now. Where I am now is 20 years. I've been doing this since I was 17 years old. 20 plus years, 25 years. 25 years. Look at my journey as like 20 something years of like 20 years of not eating at all. That's, you know what I mean? It's only been in the last few years. Track the films. The films tell you the journey, right? Track the films. It's only been the last few years that I've been able to like have a certain level of not financial comfort per se, but comfort in the fact that I can say no now, not face a whole earthquake of repercussions. Like, it's really important for me to let the world know that I'm not just generally accessible because I'm hungry and thirsty and want to make. I want to make sure that it's the right thing. And so it's a rocky road, you know what I mean? There's very few slots, but I believe that everybody has a slot, and your slot is guaranteed when you are in tune with your lineage and your story.
Amazing. That's a brilliant way to end, Bradford Young. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. Really enjoyed that.
All good. Good. I'm jealous I'm not in London. I wish I was in London.
I know. Oh, just come and visit us soon.
Oh, don't worry. It might not be a visit. It'll just be a permanent stay.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
So just to say thanks again to Bradford. That was a brilliant hour. So much thought and insight and wisdom shared. And we'll see you back in 2 weeks, where we have a behind the scenes with some of our Somerset House staff looking at arts careers. So thank you so much.
Great, y'all.